Good evening, everybody. It's very nice that I can speak in English. And I also like the setting of the seating, the seating setting. It feels like a living room. It's a little smaller than what I'm used to, but otherwise okay. We have about 45 minutes where I'll be doing a monologue, for which I apologize. But you can jump in, or you should jump in at any time. If it's too slow, then fast forward me. And if it's too fast, slow me down. And you know the jazz. This is not your first conference that you've attended. Let's start with a little lesson from, I think, psychology or maybe even psychiatry. I think in medicine, all depends on what sort of a diagnosis you give to the patient. And if you give a wrong diagnosis, then of course the whole treatment is going to be misjudged and misguided. Now, there is sort of a general consensus in the media, in politics, and even, I would say, among economists, that the economy is depressed. This, I think, is a misguided diagnosis. I don't think the economy is depressed. A better diagnosis would be that the economy is manic depressed. And when you're dealing with a manic depressed patient, you have to give, of course, a completely different treatment than when you're dealing with a depressed patient. So the treatment that we are choosing today is we're giving antidepressives. So we think that the patient is depressed. We want to get his mood back or her mood back. So we give them budget deficits. Budget deficits, of course, increase the mood of the economy, that's pumping sort of the blood into the system. But the problem is that the patient is not depressed, the patient is manic depressed. And, when a depressed patient gets his mood back, it's good news. If a manic depressed patient gets her moods back, it's not necessarily a good mood because, of course, the reversion back into the mania happens. And I have been, listening to many conferences. Unfortunately, I missed this because I had to travel from southern Germany. But most of the conferences really are focused on give us back our manias. When will we grow fanatically again? When will we have these low levels of unemployment? When we'll have low this and that and high that and this? Now, if you treat a manic depressed patient, you first have to address her or his mania. Just treating the depression doesn't help. And let's really just go through quickly the main characteristics of a manic stage. Okay, so the first one is this person has much more optimistic and more sanguine reading of the current and especially of the future. So he or she, for example, believes that it's going to grow and grow and grow, that the house prices will go up and up and up again, and that everything is a sunny side up sort of an economy and nothing wrong can happen. This, of course, is a very dangerous belief, which we've all believed. The second characteristic, which is very close to the first one, a person in a manic stage spends much more money than he or she can afford. No need to go into that. Our economies, our Western economies, have been doing exactly that, not only on a personal level, but mainly on the level of a government, also on the level of banks that have been really spending or lending much more money that they should have, and also lending at much lower interest rates than was appropriate, which we only see now. And the third characteristic, I think, that's what you're looking at. I was wondering when nobody's looking at me. Okay. It's funny. It's a bigger size. Okay, larger than life. Okay. And the third sort of a characteristic of a person who's in mania is that he or she is very productive, competitive, and creative. The only bummer there is that it doesn't last very long. So these people, artists, usually suffer from this quite frequently. During their manic stages, they work 24/7. They really are very creative. Most of their good work is done during these manic stages, and then, of course, they burn out and they revert into these depressions. Now, if you choose only to treat depressions, it's like choosing to treat hangovers when you're dealing with an alcoholic. Clearly, hangover is not the problem. The problem when you're dealing with an alcoholic is an excessive usage of alcohol, not the hangover. And if we manage to cure the hangovers, we are not going to really help the alcoholic. On the contrary, we will probably make him or her, we live in a politically correct age, so her. So when she, as an alcoholic, gets her hangovers cured, I'm afraid that her alcoholism would be worse, not better. And this, I think, is an example of sort of the manic-depressed situation. Now, of course, we read a lot about Greece and sort of what you read in the newspapers in between the lines. Of course, nobody says this quite openly. But if the Greek economy, or if Greeks worked twice as much and twice as efficiently and twice as diligently as they do now, they wouldn't have a problem. Now, I personally disagree with this reading, but this is what you get. Okay, well, let's be fair, and so this is an economy that sort of created a suicide when it was depressed. Let's take the same sort of a view and let's have a look on Ireland. Now, Ireland is a typical economy that created a suicide during a manic stage. So isn't it true for Irish, especially bankers, my colleagues, if Irish bankers worked half the time they did, they wouldn't have a problem? And this, my friends, I think is the problem. This is the root of the issue. Greece, to me, is a casualty. It's a friendly fire. It's something that is not intellectually interesting. Everybody in this room knows what to do with Greek. Everybody who's reading Financial Times, you can be 7 years old, you know exactly what to do with Greece on a theoretical, intellectual, economical level. There was a wonderful Dutch politician who said a sentence which I remember. He said, you know, the problem is, it's not that we wouldn't know what to do as politicians. We know very well what to do. We just don't know how to be re-elected after doing it. You know, this, I think, is the Greek problem, but intellectually not challenging. Now, what to do with the Irish situation? That's a challenge for intelligent people like you. And mind you, the Irish challenge, the Irish problem, is much more similar to the root of the crisis, which is the American subprime crisis. And there you saw the same manic behavior again. And when you treat a depressed person, you give them antidepressants. So in terms of the economy today, what you do is you give budget deficits. When you deal with a manic depressive patient, you do not give antidepressants, you give mood stabilizers. In other words, you spoil the good mood, you slow them down, and you increase the mood when they are depressed. So the role of an economist is not to increase GDP. The role of an economist is to decrease the amplitude of a business cycle. Now, the economy has an inborn tendency to be manic depressive. You know, when the mood is good, you buy everything and you sort of extrapolate the line. We even have beautiful studies that show that you really can get very manic in your expectations, and we all saw that. And so the government should work against it, so to speak. And they have two hands, or the government has two hands to do that. And this is very simple monetary policy, introductory economics 101. One is called fiscal policy and the other one is called monetary policy. So during the good years, you should keep interest rates higher than they should be so that you stop this investment mania a little bit. And you should be running so-called budget surpluses. I know this is a funny word. Usually when you say budget, you say deficit, but it exists. It's like a Yeti, you know. Nobody's seen it. everybody talks about it. But budget surpluses is something that you should actually do during the good years. Why? Because firstly, you have to slow down this mania. That's the first role. And secondly, you should be saving up for bad times. Which brings me to the story of Joseph, if I may. I've used this many times, but it's a beautiful story. It's the first business cycle in the history of mankind, and I sort of gave the answer away, but usually I ask, what is the first business cycle in the history of mankind? And nobody sort of comes up with very simple Sunday school stuff, which a 7-year-old child would understand. And, you know, the Pharaoh has a dream, and in this dream he sees 7 fat cows, and I always have to be careful not to look on anyone particular when I speak about 7 fat cows. But he does see 7 fat cows in a dream, and then he sees 7 lean cows, and he asks Joseph, you know, what does that mean? And Joseph says, well, you know, congratulations. You've just had the first macroeconomic prediction in the history of mankind, and you hit 14 years. I mean, we don't even do 14 years forecasts. We do usually wrong forecasts 2 years ahead of time. And then we have triple the amount of explanations why we were wrong. But yeah, so Joseph says, do not eat everything that grows, create budget surpluses, and then in the bad years, you can open up your storages and everybody will be fine. What's interesting about this story is that maybe about 4,000 years ago, people managed to go through a major economic crisis without a single penny of debt. They didn't run budget deficits. They didn't run into debt like they didn't run into debt like we do today. Consequently, in economics, we don't even have a term for it. We have a word for debt to GDP ratio. This is something that everybody follows, you know, the 60% Maastricht criteria. But when a country actually saves up, we don't even have a word for it in economics. You know, if they have a negative debt to GDP ratio, we don't even have a term. We're so used to debt financing that we can't really even think in terms of actually providing these reserves for bad years. Consequently, I think, you know, from today's vantage point, Keynes, whom you mentioned, Keynes would be a right-winger today. Our macroeconomic policy is left of Keynes. It's more leftish than Keynes. Why? Because we were running budget deficits even in the good years. So, you know, Keynes would be probably turning around in his grave, being very conservative, saying, you know, guys, when you're growing like that, you must have budget surpluses. You know, it was very difficult what Keynes said, basically, in a nutshell. He said, you can run budget deficits, providing you will run budget surpluses in the good years. Now, with all the PhDs and all the sophisticated mathematical rules, this seemed to be a very complicated sentence, so we sort of halved it and multiplied it by 2. So today, the only macroeconomic wisdom is you can run deficits, period. And you can see the debate today. I mean, I'm very glad that we have come to the conclusion that you can't be, you know, running on this drug called deficit forever. But still, the debate today is let's run lower deficits. Let's still increase our debt, but let's do it at a slower pace. Nobody really talks about surpluses in the good years, which is the only thing that can really cure this manic depressive feature of economics. So, you know, even the cure is a little suspicious. I mean, you must have noticed this. What was the problem? The economy. What will bring us out of the problem? Even more economics. What was the problem that brought us into the crisis? Too cheap loans, too sanguine consumption. What will bring us out of it? Even more consumption. What was the problem before, especially in the United States of America, where the crisis started? Low interest rates. What's the solution? What's the cure? Even lower interest rates. What was the problem where, the rating agencies, everybody was AAA, plus, with a positive outlook? The AAA story is sort of funny. Maybe they'll invent 4 A's or 5 A's or 7 A's. But you can't really be giving A's to every student in your class. I mean, that is a little suspicious. But what's the cure? Please, no matter what you do not downgrade. We, French, Americans, Germans, we have to be AAA. I mean, everybody knows that we are now walking on a very slippery slope when it comes to our financing, but please do not downgrade us. You can't really upgrade us from AAA, so at least don't downgrade us. This is a behavior in psychoanalysis that fits perfectly the definition of fetish. Fetish is something that promises you the way to salvation, be it sexual enjoyment or, redemption or sort of being the full you, but at the same time it blocks it. So it's both a road. When you start walking, you hit the wall. This is the sort of a behavior you see in economics. It's a solution to everything. Growth is a solution to everything. But also, you're not good enough to grow. And we've seen this fetishization in the history many times. And I fundamentally don't believe there's anything crucially wrong with economics, except for a couple of things, which I will come to later. One of them is interest rate. But what the problem is that we fetishized it. And if you fetishize something, you overuse it, and then it can kill you. Deficits in the beginning were supposed to give us more freedom. So the government could build more highways, educate more people, all very beautiful and holy things. And they could only do so by running deficits. So this additional freedom is now what is enslaving us. Greece, Ireland, Hungary, even America, even France, even I would argue German politics are now becoming, or have become, or we have become, the slaves of debt that we ourselves produced. We now have to answer to something that originally was to serve us. Now we are serving it. It's even called debt service, In your budget, every year you have to give interest rates to satisfy your interest payments, of course, and it's called debt service. And you see this many times in culture, in history, in literature, in art. Philosophically speaking, it's called subject-object reversal. Something that you are in control, and this is supposed to serve you. Something happens, and it's the other way around. To take a stupid example, Matrix. Everybody knows Matrix. What's the story there? We created robots, artificial intelligence. What for? To slave for us. Okay, something happens. We have become the slaves of machines. Aladdin's lamp, same story. Golem of Prague, same story. Even Kundera, to do a little bit of cultural export, if I may, who is a Czech author. This is the sort of a plot that he exploits many times. A man, in his novels and short stories, man starts a game with a woman, usually. In this, he's quite sexist. Why? Because he thinks he can control the game. And he plays the game and everything is cool until something happens and the game starts playing him. He loses his degrees of freedom. He is becomes slave to the very own game that he invented and started the ball rolling. So from a puppeteer, you become a puppet. And this, of course, game that it is not alive sort of gets a logic of its own. It gets a life of its own, like Gollum, like the machines, etc., etc., and it starts controlling you. In a small little way, you see this even in theology. In the beginning, this is sort of Christianity in half a minute. In the beginning, God creates human beings. Something goes wrong, human beings backfire, eventually maneuvering God, or God maneuvers himself to a corner position where he needs to kill himself in order for this game to continue. So even here, you see sort of a subject-object reversal. He came here as a servant. So God created human beings, we backfired, put God in a corner position. We human beings created machines, created the system, created the economy, da-di-da-di-da. Same story happening. This thing backfires. We are now slaves of debt. This is what Sarkozy, when he was a president of France, complained. If you remember, this was quite famous, slightly philosophical, because he is French. He said, I have lost my degrees of freedom. I have become a slave of the markets. I cannot answer to, okay, this sounds a little, but he is a politician. I cannot answer to my people. I cannot do what my people want me to do. I have to do what the markets, more appropriately, what the debt wants me to do. If I do something wrong that the markets do not like, they will downgrade me, and that's a suicide equivalent. Well, he should have went one step further and acknowledged that it is themselves that maneuvered themselves into this position. If they had low levels of debt, the rating agencies could be saying anything and it wouldn't matter. It is because they had high levels of debt that gave such a power to the markets. So that is what fetish can do. It enslaves you. To give two stupid examples from the history, European history. About 100 years ago, we Europeans, we fetishized the idea of nation, a nation state. What was the promise of a nation state? Well, you will be free. We had this lot in the Czech Republic, breaking away from you, for which I'm sorry. A lot of people saying that was a mistake. But anyway, we thought if we have our own nation, but this wasn't just particular to Czechs, this was particular to others as well, unfortunately. If we only had our nations, this would mean that we Czechs could finally shine, we would be free from all this oppression, and we would finally be the true us. So the original promise of this fetishized nation was, nation will do everything for you. It will make you the real you. But, again, subject-object reversal, you must do everything for the nation, even to the point of death. And we all know how that fetishization of a nation ended up in Europe, with bloody wars for which we feel sorry till this very day. And again, there is nothing wrong with the idea of nation-state. The problem is if you fetishize it, if you believe it too much, if you believe that this is the thing that will bring you everything. And I fear that this is what we've done with economics. Another example, a maybe more crazy example, but then again, it's an evening already. This is sort of what happened in the New Testament. Isn't this the bone that Jesus had to pick with the Pharisees? Wasn't he really telling them, you Pharisees, you have fetishized ethics. You can fetishize a beautiful thing. You can fetishize ethics, you can fetishize nation, you can even fetishize economics. Why? Because, on one hand, again, it looks like this is a way to God, if you behave this way, blah, blah, if you know, ethics is the way to God, but on the same time, it is the block on the way to God, because you're never good enough. This is what, again, I think even the complaint that Jesus had against the Pharisees is very similar to what we hear today from, for example, Occupy movement. It's a system, so Jesus is saying to the Pharisees, you've created a system that is artificial, it is dead, it doesn't have a logic, or if it has a logic of its own that nobody understands. You pretend that it's natural, but in fact it's man-made. And it looks good from the outside, but inside it's full of rotten and bad things. And you think life works in rules. This was sort of the belief of Pharisees, rules for everything. Now, isn't this, in a little way, an echo that we hear in economics? We have rules for everything. We call it economics. Matrices, probabilities, portfolios, what else? Interest rate systems where you hedge, credit default swaps. Everything is triple derivated, very, very complicated mathematical rules that always work, and this is the way the economy works. Only when a little trouble comes, the best thing that we, with all 60,000 PhDs produced in a year, the only proper cure and solution we could have come up with was, forgive. We need forgiveness. So, in other words, forget about all these rules. So this is the problem, I think. We breached our own belief. This was the sort of the mantra of the hardcore businesses, especially, let's pick Wall Street boys. The mantra of the Wall Street boys towards the government was, do not meddle. We can do this ourselves because we are smart and we have all these equations and calculations and computers, and we can do this. We're the clever guys, you're the stupid guys. Do not meddle. Just believe in the market. Believe in the powers of the unorchestrated orchestrator. This is how I call the invisible hand of the market. It's the unorchestrated orchestrator. And this unorchestrated orchestrator will lead us into the future of growth and da-di-da-di-da. Yeah. One day later, same people come to the government saying, please meddle. Please meddle, please forget about all these rules that we have so meticulously believed in, because we cannot believe in them anymore. And please, for a little while, let's do a sort of a reset of the system. So that, I think, is the problem. I was just reading Financial Times today. I have it on my phone, and when it loads up, you probably know this, the advertisement for Financial Times is, we live in financial times, which I thought was a very funny and witty advertisement. But on the submarine and the subconscious side, I think they're right. We kiss economically, we love economically, we breathe economically, we die economically. We live in financial times. We are embedded in this belief that it is the economy that will lead us into the future. It is the economy that will save us. And if something goes wrong with the economy, then we have to dismantle the whole idea of European Union, for example. When I was small, when I studied economics, I believed that free, democratic markets are a good ground for growth. Much better ground than communism, totalitarianism, feudalism, and other systems. What I think we believe today, and this is, I think, in one way, a belief that we all have in our heads. But here, I think, again, there was sort of a reversal happening. What I read in the newspapers today is the exact opposite. Not that market democracy is a good ground for growth, but the other way around, that growth is a conditio sine qua non of market democracy. In other words, take away growth and markets will crumble. This is what you read in the newspapers every day. Take away growth and democracy will crumble. Take away growth and we Europeans as we are, we will go back into the good old smushing of each other's skulls up against the wall, which is, by the way, what we always did in the history. This is the first significant crisis of European level that didn't end up in us hating each other. Nation against nation, company against company. On the contrary, I would argue that this crisis has led us closer together. We as Europeans are actually really trying to help each other. If Greece happened 60 years ago and more in the history of Europe, the only thing we would be talking about here, the only thing you'd be reading about in newspapers, the only thing you'd be talking about in pubs is how to attack them. Because that's what you do. These people are on their knees, finally, should we first send the artillery? Should we first, do the good old airplanes, or should we just ship them? Nobody even thinks this way. This is, in a way, a European miracle. Nobody even thinks that we should be aggressive towards them. We are actually trying to help them. The other issue is that we really don't know how to help them, but sincerely, we are trying to help them. Of course, you will say, by helping them, we are only helping ourselves, to which I say, perfectly fine with me. 70 years ago, we would be trying to destroy them and thus help ourselves. So even the way we think today is much more cooperative and much more sort of friendly. Let me close with the following thought. You know, they call it European crisis. I don't see why. You know, 2007 to 2009, it was an American crisis, if you remember. And we Europeans, we published articles on the popular level and on academic level, how the European model is better than the American model because the American model goes up and goes down, whereas we here in Europe, we are stable. You must remember this. There is even this beautiful play on words, the Schadenfreude, which in English doesn't exist. So they had to actually borrow a German word. Don't worry, in Czech language we have about 7 synonyms for, Schadenfreude. But we in Europe, we were sitting down and saying, yeah, look at those Americans. We Europeans, we have the best model here. Whereas you must learn from us. Something happens, and now it's a European crisis. Europe, if you look on Europe as a whole, as a bulk, we don't have a problem. Euro is quite stable. It's becoming more and more popular. It is not, for the first time, I think, in the history of Euro, nobody complains that it's too strong or too weak, if you've noticed. It's just fine. Not even the French. Not even the Germans, not even anybody else. Our debt level is much lower than that of the United States of America, and much, much lower than that of Japan. Our growth is much more healthier than in the United States of America. You know the trick that we do with GDP? It's a very nasty and very stupid trick. If I borrow 10,000 euros, only a fool would say that I'm 10,000 euros richer. Everybody understands it's a loan. It's not yours, it's a loan, yeah? You can pretend to be richer, but you sort of have to do the payback thing. Now, that's sort of clear. But on a governmental level, when government does exactly the same thing, everybody, including the analysts, applaud, now we're 3% GDP richer. Forgetting that in the same year we had 3, 4, 5, 7% budget deficit. So I don't get it. Okay, maybe we can still call it GDP, but let's just say gross debt product, because it's not really gross domestic product, it's a gross debt product. It's like saying, I'm $10,000 richer. This makes no sense, and this is the trick that we have been running. And this is the trick that they're doing now in the United States of America. United States is growing a little faster, around 2%, but the budget deficit is 8%. So where is the growth? This makes no sense whatsoever. So anyway, so that's why European growth is much healthier than what you see in the United States of America. They call it fiscal cliff. I'm happy that even our American friends are coming to terms that we have to do austerity. But, we each take our time. So what's the problem of Europe then, if we are so stable? Well, the problem is that we are 27 individual fiscal constituencies. If you split up Japan into 27 fiscal constituencies, third or maybe even half of Japan would be bankrupt. Wales would be bankrupt if it wouldn't be part of the United Kingdom. So would many parts of Austria if you wouldn't be part of Austria, if you took your regions, or how do you call it? Not regions, you call it regions. Bundesland, okay. Same thing with the United States of America. If you actually took every state differently, had individual statistics, and looked at them more than on the statistics of the United States of America, you would find a much more sad picture than what you see in Europe. So to me, this is a test of unity. If we survive this as Europeans, and I do admit this is a very cruel test. For a young currency such as euro, it's a cruel test. It's, as you know, many deem it the biggest financial crisis since the 20s, and that's a cruel test. Just notice how Americans reacted to the crisis. Did anybody think, oh, we are in a financial crisis, oh, it must be the dollar. Let's dismantle the dollar. Let's kick California out of the United States of the dollar zone, and that will help them. Nobody really suggested that because it doesn't really make much sense. Whereas here in Europe, oh, it must be the euro. Why? Because it's new. And because we are not an optimal currency area. Well, you know, I think the difference between Helsinki and Athens is much smaller than between New York and South Dakota. Religiously, economically, politically. We're not that different, okay? We have different languages, but next to that, try to, as a New Yorker, try to, without changing of dress, try to actually parachute yourself in South Dakota and see how long you survive. Okay, how much more time do we have? Can I tell one more joke? Okay. I didn't finish the story with the two hands, you know. So the government has two ways how to diminish this manic depressive. One is called fiscal policy. That basically is, let's start with monetary policy. Monetary policy basically is the monopoly of the government to print money. Fiscal policy is very different. Fiscal policy is the monopoly of the government to print debt. Now, 2 generations ago, we educated Westerners have decided that it's not very clever if the government and politicians can print money as they see fit. Because it's too much of a temptation. It's too powerful a tool. Let's do a little exercise here. Any one of you, probably all of you know J.R.R. Tolkien. He wrote this trilogy called The Lord of the Rings. Now, of course, economists and business people like you immediately have to ask yourself the question, well, who was the Lord of the Rings? Who is this trilogy about? Who was the CEO of the rings? Who did the ring answer to? So, who? Oh, it's not my water. Thank you. My water's black. So who was the Lord of the Rings? I mean, Hobbit just came out, but it wasn't the Hobbit. Well, maybe you think Mordor, the Dark Lord. Well, he wasn't the Lord of the Rings. Exactly, that's the problem. If he would be the Lord of the Rings, we wouldn't have the trilogy because the problem would be solved. He didn't own the ring. He didn't control the ring. He was looking for the ring. The ownership was disjointed. He did create the ring, but he was not in control. In fact, again, you see this fetish moment here. When you destroyed the ring, you destroyed Mordor. So the pecking order looked, Mordor is the master of the ring, but it was actually, at the end of the day, he put too much power into the ring. You destroyed the ring, Mordor disappeared, almost. But my question is different. Did you notice that none of the wise ever touched the ring? Not Gandalf, not Galadriel, not Elrond, not Legolas, not Aragorn, not even Gimli. Never touched the ring. Why? Well, because it was too much of a temptation. They wouldn't be able to stand it. Fiscal and monetary policy, I argue, is a similar case. Monetary policy, too tempting to have the printing machine in your room if you are a politician. Why? Because you will use it, of course. We need to build more highways. We need to give more money into the economy. The doctors need more money. The teachers need more money. Everybody needs more money. Surprise. So, okay. Well, why not? What's the death of printing money? The death of printing money is hyperinflation. So we decided we're not going to play this game. We're going to tie this hand behind our backs. In other words, we're giving this ring away. The ring of power of printing money must be destroyed. We're giving it to the Frodo, the central banks. They don't know how powerful tool they have. Just a little note here. Did you, by the way, realize that monetary policy is not, strictly speaking, democratic? I mean, you do not elect your governor. And I think it's a good thing. Just imagine how that election would end up. 2 governors, one say, I promise you stable CPI. And the other would say, I promise you 10,000 euros every week, because yes, I can. And who would be elected? I think even in such an educated nation like such as Austria, or Czech Republic, or I'm afraid the second guy would win. I have this feeling. So that's why we said no, National Bank is going to not play games with the ring. They must be ignorant to the tremendous bazooka political power that printing money has. And they have only one dog to follow, which is CPI. So, thus, and I really come to the conclusion now, thus the problem. We are solving everything with the fiscal hand. We are solving everything with printing debt. And now, in Europe, this, I think, is the core of the debate. Should we let both hands loose and make deflation available again, to make printing money available again, to make setting of individual interest rates for countries available again? In other words, to start a trade war. This is one thing that Euro has really brought to us. It took away the temptation to start trade wars, because you can't devaluate your currency, because you can't block your borders from imports and subsidize your exports, because you can't put up tariffs. Those were always the beginning of the trade wars. And those trade wars often led to real, proper, bloody wars. Today, we can't wage trade wars. The temptation is not even present. No trade union will come to you and say, we need to devaluate our currency, because you can't do it. And that's a good thing. Or the other, which is take away also fiscal policy from politicians. In other words, create a similar body like a national bank that will decide how much debt to print. Of course, it should remain in the competition of a land, and this should be 100% democratic. We should decide whether we want to live in a low tax, low expenditure country, such as, for example, the United States of America or Ireland, or we want to live in a high tax, high expenditure country, which is, for example, the North. Both is fine. Today I don't have a preference. But what you can't do is this. Believe in the low tax country, but with the same breath, believe in the high expenditure country. That's creating a schizophrenia, which is called budget deficit. And this schizophrenia, if you're running it for long enough, will create your death. It will do what it did in Greece. Greece, by the way, is not behind us in this way. Greeks, like always in the history, they are ahead of us. They've just bankrupted some 20, 30 years before we would. So we should be really grateful, because that's a very nice, scary example. Greece is in this, I think, sort of a scary model of what would happen with all of us. So the choice now is whether politicians should. Do you here in Austria want to do this, or do you want to do this, but this is not possible? You should decide whether you will tax the rich or the poor or the middle class and give it to the capable or incapable. That should be, of course, in the domain of democracy, absolutely, even more so than it is today. But what shouldn't be a domain of democracy is to print the money in between. So I tax a little bit, and then I print up the rest of debt, and I survive. So with that, I will finish my monologue, and I beg you for your comments and questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, of course, it's a very lively picture, the manic depressive. And I don't know whether you mentioned or not, probably you have. It's that illness and that defect, let's say, that bears the highest suicide rates of all illnesses we know.
Yeah.
And manic depressive illness.
Yeah.
So that's interesting. And you talked about suicide. As far as I know, the highest risk of suicide with patients with manic depressive disease is to manage or medicate the phase when it comes from manic phase to depressive phase. So then even for skilled doctors, it's not easy to find the right medication to prevent the patient from suicide.
Yeah.
That seems to be still fitting into your picture.
This fits very well, and also we should remember that many suicides actually happen.
So what about medication?
Many suicides happen even through the manic period because you believe you can fly, and you jump out of the window, sadly. So what's the medication? The medication is mood stabilizers. This is why, by the way, many people with bipolar disorder refuse the medication, because it spoils their mood during the manic stages, which is exactly what these pills should do. And that's also true for the economy.
And in the period we are now, of course, mood stabilization would mean higher interest rates in the good times. Of course, well, we still do not. So what would be the appropriate medication for the phase the patient, and that is the European states are now?
The proper medication is similar to everybody who's drug dependent. We are dependent on deficits. Notice how we can't even talk on whatever, the cure, without talking about deficits. I mean, we have to have some level of deficits. It's also outside of the debate. So we are dependent. We can't imagine life without it. This is a nice description of dependence. You cannot imagine your life without it, even though others can. So, alcoholics cannot imagine life without alcohol. Others can. Although it's tough even for non-alcoholics. But
it's simply less fun.
It's simply less, but you shouldn't really believe anybody who doesn't drink. But occasionally. See, I'm not really interested in your job promotion, But your question was different. So, how to treat? Well, you have to do what I call a quick, slow detox. If you have somebody who's dependent on drug, you can't quit it from day to day. You have to slowly detox it. Translating it into economics, I think what would really help us today is to create a rule, such as, for example, Joseph, and it's really 4,000 years old, a credible rule of saying, yes, we now need to detox. We still need to take little intakes of budget deficits. But when times get right, we will automatically, without any political discretion, without any political populism, create budget surpluses. In other words, we will pay back our debts. So this, I think, if we gave this...
But that's what they promise in the bad times when they expanded deficits. That's what they always say. We have to do now because there's no other way out, but we will.
But it's not credible.
But we will slow down when times get better. That's what they always promise.
That's exactly my point. As long as
how
politicians...
to force them?
Take it away. Simply take it away. Because, I mean, if I was a minister of finance of any country, I would do the same.
So you would prefer some sort of constitutional regulation like they tried in Germany?
For example, take it away out of political discretion, like we have taken away money printing. Today, politicians, no matter how much they want to, how much they promise, cannot print money, which is a good thing. We are used to it now. And I think the same thing should happen with this. In a way, was something that the Fiscal Compact or the six-pack tried to go towards. And I think in the future, this is something that we, and also in America, will have to adopt, that deficits. Okay, so that's the first thing. Deficits should not be in the discretion of politicians, like money printing isn't. Secondly, we should forget about fiscal policy in terms of a nation, but we should start looking on regions and on industries. Nobody talked about doing fiscal policy industry-wise. Because today, you don't have crises visiting Austria and then visiting Czech Republic, and then, oh, there's a border there, and we don't have a passport.
Let's go to France.
Yeah, let's go to France. So, of course, crises visit either an industry, banking, housing, whatever, and we should have some sort of fiscal impulse within that industry, nation A-specific, or regions. Okay, there is a draft or something. Draft reminds me of beer, right? Like beer, yeah. But the other draft, the worst draft, drought or something. And then, yeah, okay, if there is a region in Greece, like there is a region in Austria, like there is a region in the northern part of Czech Republic that needs financial help, then we do it, but not as a whole nation. So I think coming together as Europeans with our fiscal, somehow, and this I think is the direction that it's going to. I think in a couple of years we will see these things materialize.
There's one more temptation, of course, that you did not mention, and it is correlated to the fiscal policy, that's taxation.
Yeah.
And there are many people and politicians and economists as well, for the time being, who would say that the best and quickest fix for the situation we have is taxation.
Yeah, well, the problem is, I think this is in a nutshell our problem. Taxes here, expenditure here. The only way out of it, there's two ways out of it. Either you increase taxes, which you're going to make very angry everybody who's making money, which is maybe half of your electorate. So nobody wants to do it, of course. Or the other way, I'm going to be completely apolitical here, or the other way is you decrease your expenditure, which is we're going to make the other half of the nation angry, those people that are, living from pensioners and others who are living from government subsidies, so to speak.
Solution is make both of them angry.
Solution is, well, the solution that we've applied today is, well, we keep low taxes, we keep high expenditure, and we just borrow the rest, which is wonderful because you make 8 people angry. Analysts are usually very angry when deficits amount, but we don't go striking, we don't have hunger strikes for balanced budgets. So that's why the system is set in such a way that even I, and I know this perfectly, even I, if I was in a position of a minister, I would probably use the trick, because who wouldn't? It's just, this is not that the politicians are stupid. The system is set up in a way that they will be tempted and they will use it, of course. Every one of you would do it, I think.
And there was one principal question that you announced to answer that I would have found interesting, and that was that you said capitalism is working fine except some sort of principal problems, and one of those was interest rate.
Yeah, let's do that. I think with our portfolio management, with our risk management, with everything, we've created a car with an airbag that works always perfectly except for a car crash. And this is sort of what we've seen. We have it all hedged, we have it all portfolioized, we have credit default swaps, we have it insured there and there, and it's fine, and it works all the way till it doesn't work. So the system works when it works, and it doesn't work when it doesn't work, and it's even worse. We actually don't know in which one of those situations we are. Does the system work? Yeah, you can find arguments. Does the system? Yeah, also. So, but interest rate, I think, is interesting, because interest rate is something that I do history of economic thought philosophically and sort of, let's say, I don't know, yeah. If you go into it a little bit, again, the history of interest rate in 50 seconds, everybody from the ancient wise men, be it philosophers, wizards, religious leaders, warned us against the usage of interest rate. Aristotle, Thomas Aquinas, Old Testament, Vedas, Quran, Hammurabi Code, everywhere you find these really weird warnings: do not use interest rates. There is something spooky about it. We don't know what, but don't use it.
But always with the second sentence, not from your brother, only from the foreigners.
Yeah, this I think when the Pharisees came to ask Jesus, who is my brother, they were asking him a technical question. Can I charge him an interest rate? I think, because today we have a tendency to read the Bible spiritually and look at economics technically. In fact, it's all absolutely embedded, and it doesn't make sense if you separate it. For example, interest rate has always been a hugely moral topic. Always, anywhere you look. Only today, interest rate is a technical topic. No morality associated, no effects. It's just a machine. It's a clockwork orange, has nothing to do with anything. But in fact, the ethics is in it, of course, only we swallowed it. So economics, that's why economics is full of ethics, only we're not aware of it. One example is you should be maximizing your utility. This is what the body of economics is telling you. The use of interest rate is safe. You're not harming anybody if you do it. This was something that we as mankind debated for 1,000 years. So anyway, we have these warnings from the past. Don't use interest rates. Something spooky about it. We do not understand it. Aristotle admits it. I don't understand. It shouldn't be like this. We today, we have made it a cornerstone of our civilization. I mean, your business, my business, works on the very assumption of interest rate. It wouldn't work without it, would it? And this, I think, is the problem of interest rate. I mean, if I may, the similarity between alcohol and interest rate. Ever thought of that? Interest rate makes time travel of money possible. If I borrow money from you, it looks like I'm borrowing it from you, but in fact, I'm taking it from my own future. Okay, so when I'm 60, I have to take my $10,000 and give them back to you or to whoever lends the money to me. So, and this is only possible because of interest rate. So time travel of money, it's like beam me up, Scotty, from Star Trek. Interest rate is what makes money travel in time. So does alcohol, you will notice. Alcohol is fully capable of time travel of energy. To give a specific example, let's imagine it's a Friday evening, which is 2 days from now. It's coming. You're drinking in the bar, feeling all this extra energy. Suddenly, you notice that you can dance. Suddenly, you notice that you can sing. You're being very sexy. And even others think that. Girls are laughing at your jokes. You know, things that normally don't happen. They're dancing with you, and everything is good. And you're thinking, wow, it must be this alcohol. This is a wonderful thing. That, I think, is a mistake. Alcohol doesn't really bring you any extra energy. The only thing it does, it takes your Saturday morning energy and it transports it into a Friday evening. But the energy of the weekend is constant, you know. There is really you may meet your wife on a Friday evening, but you still will have a hangover, at least on a Saturday morning. But anyway, so this is very similar to money. Interest rate. Interest rate does...
And money. It's
and
a
money,
travel of
right.
Of
money is energy.
wealth.
Money, I can give you energy. This is what we do. We send each other energies. We even use magic words. I mean, if somebody from a medieval time would wake up today, he would think, oh, these guys are magicians. They're sending each other energies, and they're using these magical words, which we call the pin code. And through that, I can send and gather energies from you. So this, I think, is the problem with interest rate. Interest rate can transport energy over huge distances of time, 40 years. And two problems there. Firstly, just imagine that your hangovers would come irregularly. In other words, you get drunk on a Friday and your hangover comes, I don't know. Monday, yeah, or Thursday afternoon. You know, you're thinking, oh, it's Sunday and I still didn't have my hangover. You would drink much more cautiously, of course, because it could hit you in the middle of a meeting, in the middle of driving. You don't know. This is how the economy is. It's unpredictable. First thing. And second thing, it's fine to get drunk, if you're so inclined, on a Friday evening, if you know there is nothing very important happening on Shabbat morning. It's not clever, I think, to get drunk on a Sunday evening when you have something really important happening on a Monday morning. And this is one way how to read the crisis. We've sent the money from far away, and it is absolutely fundamentally uncalculable what will happen in 40 years' time. And we've simply landed, I think, again, one way how to read the crisis, we've landed with a very bad hangover on a Monday morning.